Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Board of Selectmen meeting on Tuesday, January 21st, 6:30 p.m. at the McAuliffe Hearing Room at the Townhouse. All selectmen are present with the exception of Mr. Kalenda. Start with public comment, if there is any. Seeing none, I'm going to move ahead under our scheduled appointments. The Police Chief Paulus. Chief has 4 items this evening for us.
Evening, everybody. So I know I'm taking up a good portion of your agenda tonight. So we want to go straight down the list?
Sure, sounds good.
So first, I'm requesting approval to move Student Officer Austin Chapsky to Probationary Officer effective February 15th, 2020, upon his successful graduation from the MPTC Academy on February 14th. So that's Valentine's Day. I'm sure everybody there will be happy about that. Looking forward to getting Austin into the FTO program and on the road. As you know, town resident, his brother works for the department. He's been a dispatcher for us. Just both fantastic people, so looking forward to getting him going. His pay status will change from $700 per week to $969.69 per week per the union contract.
Any questions, comments?
Not for me.
Not for me.
Is there a motion?
I make a motion to appoint Student Officer Austin Chapsky to Probationary Officer effective 2/15/20.
Second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Chief Paulus.
Okay, second item, and always great to come for promotions and hirings, always a great time. So please consider my recommendation to appoint Mr. Jeff Norton as a full-time student police officer effective February 24th, 2020. That's when the Boylston Academy is about to start. This classification will last until its graduation from the MPTC Boylston, at which time he will transition to a probationary officer. Mr. Norton was extended a conditional offer as a student officer on 10/29/19 with a start date to be determined. That was basically to hold the academy spot. Mr. Norton holds a Bachelor of Arts in Marketing from Johnson & Wales University in Providence. He's a resident of Hopkinton. His employment history, background check, and interviewing skills reflect a high level of communication and community policing skills. Jeff will be stepping down from his current part-time assignment as a telecommunications officer with the Southborough PD to accept the position made possible by the resignation of Sergeant Richardson. His salary will be $700 per week per the union contract for a student officer, and will end when Mr. Norton becomes certified as a police officer upon graduation from the MPTC, where he will transition to a Step 1 full-time probationary officer per the union contract. I think that we've really been served well by getting a chance to know Jeff. He came to us, he was the runner-up on the last list, runner-up to Austin, and we really wanted to hire both of them at that time. And Jeff has some connection with the town. His wife works for St. Mark's. He worked for St. Mark's for a while, and he really enjoyed getting to know the people in Southborough. We hired him as a part-time dispatcher, and we were really able to see what he was about. And you know, since May of last year, we really felt that we hit a home run. So I'm just asking you to confirm his appointment tonight.
Great, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate that background information too, and the familiarity that Jeff does have with the town going into the position. So, thanks. Any other questions, comments?
No, just Chief, you're presenting us with very easy choices
I
tonight.
know. We don't
Very
get many of
qualified,
these.
very impressive.
Thank you.
With that, is there a motion?
I make a motion to appoint Jeffrey Norton as full-time student police officer effective 2/24/20.
Second?
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations,
unanimously.
welcome.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Excellent.
Thanks, Chief, I
All right.
appreciate it.
Great to have you on
Thank
board.
Thank you.
Ready for the next item?
I am.
So now that Jeff is moving up, we're going to need some more part-time dispatchers. So please consider my recommendation to appoint Ms. Stephanie Fontaine is a part-time telecommunications officer with the Southborough Police. Ms. Fontaine is an Upton resident. She has a long history of employment and customer service and currently holds certifications in Next Gen 911 and the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials. Her appointment would be of great benefit to the department. Her starting date will be determined shortly after successful completion of a number of screening checks and the board's approval.
Excellent. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, question. Does Ms. Fontaine have any Southborough connection or experience? She's not worked for the department or other departments in the town previously?
She does not. She does have an interest in getting into the dispatch field, so on her own, she paid for herself to attend these 2 prerequisite trainings on her own, and she's certified, so it'll be an easy process once she gets her screening cleared to bring her on. So
Good.
I interviewed her with the lieutenant, and we're excited to have her come aboard.
Good, thank you.
And if anybody knows anybody that's interested in dispatch, send them this way.
Okay. With that, is there a motion?
I make a motion to appoint Stephanie Fontaine as part-time communications officer, start date to be determined after successful completion of screening checks.
Second.
Moved, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Chief Paulus, item 4.
Last one. So just asking the board to consider my request to hold the Citizens Police Academy to start sometime in late March or early April. The event will run for approximately 8 consecutive weeks and will partner with the towns of Northborough and Westborough to form the first ever Boroughs Citizen Police Academy. I will note that we've had some very good success partnering with the towns. We now run our Junior Police Academy as a Boroughs Academy. We share resources, manpower, background, and we're able to run these things very successfully. Also, our jail diversion program counselor comes through a grant with the boroughs. So we're looking to expand our footprint with those organizations. And like I said, it's worked out very well, and we developed those relationships with those other really neighboring towns. Sure you're aware, Citizen Police Academy, very successful across the country, building relationships and a more in-depth understanding of the police profession. Last session conducted by the Southborough Police was in 2018 and proved to be highly successful. The academy will be under the direction of 1 officer selected from each community. I'll say I'm choosing 2 this time. We had 2 that put in for a sincere interest, Officer Jake Woodford and Officer Steve Nivert, so they'll be our representatives. And the classes for the first year will be held in a new Southborough Public Safety Building training room. So we'll take advantage of that. We'll be able to extend the number of people because of the size of the room. And previously, all waiver forms have been reviewed by town council for approval, so we'll use those same ones. And I highly encourage anybody on the board that wants to take part to do so. I think everybody that participated last time found it highly rewarding.
Excellent. It's great to have a nice facility to
Yes, very
be able
much.
to host this as well.
Yeah, not just on the board, this is your chance for an advertisement for it.
Yes.
How many people typically take part in it, and what's your target for the number of people that could take part in it?
I believe last time we limited it to 20, just because of the size of the room and, you know, what we can really feed people. So usually we set up the room in a horseshoe, and then the instructor comes right in the middle. So we'll do the same approach this time, but with a larger room and more manpower to participate. It'll probably be around 30, 35. So that's what we'll go with. And you kind of got to go out and recruit a little bit because it's a big commitment for 8 weeks. But the people who did participate last time, they were just, you know, really ecstatic with what was presented. And a lot of them are hoping that they can do it again, actually, so.
8 weeks, how many hours a week?
It's usually from 6 to 9.
1 day a week, or?
1 day a week.
1 day a week, all right.
So we're trying in that, you know, late March, April, you know, where things may slow down a little bit before all the sports and stuff pick up. So that's what
Great.
we're looking at.
Good idea.
Great. Ms. Braschi.
I know a few people that took it on the last time, my husband being
Yes,
one,
yes.
and thoroughly enjoyed it. He said it was wonderful. I mean, it goes through all different things of learning about the police. You actually get to do a ride-along as well, which is always a great opportunity for any citizen to do. What is the age for the citizens? Is it 18 and over, or
Yes, 18.
it is 18 and over? Well, again, I recommend highly to anyone. It's a great opportunity. I know everyone spoke really highly that did take it in the past, and who knows? Maybe I'll do it this time.
All righty.
Thank you.
I'm saving one spot.
All right, you do that.
A couple of questions. As part of the advertising process here, if you picked a night for the week to do it, or is that still up in the air?
Yeah, I reserved the room on Wednesdays.
Wednesdays, okay, so that's where it's headed for people who might be interested.
Yes.
Is there a capacity limit for Southborough residents? How do you determine who gets in? If 35 Southborough residents apply initially, does that mean we get all the slots, or
No, we'll try
does
and
that
split
work?
it up evenly.
so you balance it across the four
Yes.
boroughs? Okay.
And then we're hoping in future years, I know Westboro just redid their building. They have the old auditorium at Westboro, the town hall over there, police department, but the old school, it's really a beautiful room now. And then we'd have to see what Northborough has, but that's the plan. So we'll have it, we'll rotate it every year, keep it fresh.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So does that require a vote, I guess? To approve this? Be good, okay. Is there a motion?
I make a motion to approve the Citizens Police Academy with Northborough and Westborough, date to be determined.
Second.
Move seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Chief.
Good stuff, Chief, thanks.
Congratulations again, Mr. Norton.
All right, I'm going to go back to the first item under scheduled appointments for Cultural Council update. Mary Picards, Chair. Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it.
I'm Lynn Davis, so I'll
Hi,
just,
Lynn, how are you?
it's an extra seat, so.
No problem. No problem.
Hi, thank you for having us. As you said, I'm Mary Picards. I've been on the council, I guess, about 2 years. And Lynn is hopefully joining the council. She's been kind of a member at large for a few meetings anyway. Just to give you an update, I don't know how many of you are aware of how the council is run, but we are allocated money from the Mass Cultural Council each year, and we're currently in the process of giving out about $5,000 worth of grants to those that have applied in order to fund activities that will happen for the Southborough residents. That's one of the priorities. In addition to that, recently we've sponsored 2 art exhibits. One was past and current teachers at the schools and former students, and that was held in the library. There's currently another exhibit, a resident who is also a certified medical illustrator. She has her work on display at the library right now. Sigrid Niemeyer is her name. And we also arranged for music at the Rotary truck events. We had an arts and crafts fair at the community house for Heritage Day. And we have been assisting a current resident, Sophia Brady, who is getting her gold award for scouting. And we helped her host an open mic night that was attended by about 150 people at the upper floor of the rec department there. So we've been very busy. There are only about 8 of us in the council, and everyone is dedicated to helping out the town by bringing art and culture to the town. But I have to say that we have had our share of challenges. We currently don't really have dedicated space. We don't have a budget, and so it's been a challenge.
I'll speak as the member at large
Yeah.
still. Yes, I've attended a few meetings, and it's really very impressive to see how people are dedicated to wanting to bring the arts into town. And one of the main goals has been to identify the artists that we have in town, and there really are many. We have a community of some really very talented people. But part of what we'd like to do is to kind of flesh them out a little bit more, advertise more about the council, and get more people involved. Just to add a few remarks to what Mary talked about, the open mic was just a tremendous event, and I wish any of you could have been there, because it was so impressive to see. It was at least 150 teens, and some parents as well, but really having a super time, and milling about with the intermission, and it really opened up how important it is and how helpful it would be for all of us in town, for our kids to have somewhere to go and something to do, and at the same time be involved in an arts and cultural event. I also helped Mary with the Arts and Crafts Fair that we held on Heritage Day, and that was really a great success. One of the challenges Mary speaks to is the lack of space. There's no dedicated space for the council. So when we meet in the rec department while the ping pong game is going on, or games are going on next door. We love ping pong, but it would kind of be nice to have a little bit of quiet, but we're getting very good at sending the balls back that comes through the curtains. So we would like a dedicated space. Another concern is really having a dedicated space in town for bringing the arts to the town. Sigrid, who is now exhibiting at the library, she's just amazing. She tells us that there's only really a handful of people like herself who do these types of illustrations, and she's hired by pretty well-known people around the world to do these beautiful drawings. And we didn't have any place to really put this fantastic work except for the library. And we're glad we had the library, but it was just really her pictures, put in where there was a blank wall, as opposed to some sort of a semi-gallery space where really her art could be shown in the way it should be shown. I think there's been a number of people who have gone to see it because it's so incredibly impressive, but in the long run, for the town to really be involved in arts and culture and to want to see that integrated into the life of our citizens, the town needs to think about some sort of dedicated space to bring our artists.
We have had to turn people away who wanted to display their works. There was a woman in town, Dana Gardner, who has, I think she's in charge of the Pastel Society, and unfortunately she wasn't happy with the library space, and we couldn't offer her any other space, but it would be amazing if we could have her and her whole society display their artwork. So I don't know, it's something to think about for the future.
We've thought of, there's so many different things that we could be involved in. We could be working with Southborough Youth Services, for example, with the kids and families that they serve in bringing different art projects, expressive art therapy kind of people to come in and to work with Southborough Youth Services. There's so many different directions that the Arts Council could go in and could really, I think, really inject a lot of robust sense of culture and belonging and interest in the arts, and sort of to bring a bit of a more soul to the town. We're spending a lot of time looking at the future, the development of the town, the infrastructure of the town, and I think it would just be terrific if somehow we could put near the forefront as well an infrastructure of arts and culture into our community for now and for the future for our children.
Questions, comments? Mr. Healy.
Yeah, I'll start with some comments. A couple of times by design, and a couple of times because I stumbled upon it. I've been to a number of the events you put on. And the one that really stands out in my mind was the event at the library with the various artists, because there was something going on at the community house that same night,
Right.
and the energy in the little downtown, well, it's not really downtown, but the Route 85 light area was, I mean, it was palpable. And you're absolutely right, incredibly talented artists. A number of times the Economic Development Committee has been here and talking about, work that they're trying to do in downtown Southborough. And a number of us on the board have remarked to them, number one, on the terrific work you folks have done and how tying in economic development isn't just businesses. It can be things like the arts. So at least you're preaching to the choir here. I mean, you're doing terrific stuff. It sounds like you get some great ideas. I feel your pain in terms of the space, and that's something certainly that should be on your front burner, and honestly keep pestering us and others about it, because, I mean, you're absolutely right, a dedicated space makes a big difference, and there also might be some creative ways to think about, tying our businesses into it. I mean, maybe some of the businesses wouldn't mind, being the depositories for some art for a short time or something like that. Maybe that's something you've already done. Anyway, so your ideas are great. I don't want to take up a whole lot of your time other than saying, your dedication leading up to this is terrific. It's wonderful you're interested in becoming a full-fledged formal member now, and wish you best of luck with it.
Thank you. I've also heard wonderful things. I heard about the open mic night, and I heard how well that was attended and how much fun that it really was for our families. Let me just ask you, you talk a lot about families and kids and whatnot. Have you looked at possibly integrating something with the schools and be able to create some type of program or something to inspire, starting at our youth? I mean, if you're looking for space to do things, that might be an opportunity. A lot of times in the schools, parents are in the schools an awful lot. It's a great opportunity to share some of the artwork that there is. It's not a solution to what you're looking for by any means, but maybe as a stepping stone. And I don't know if maybe you had considered some form of program or a partnership maybe within the schools themselves. I mean, your group has a lot to offer. Your artists have a lot to offer that I feel it's greatly shared with the children of the community in inspiring them to go forward. And I'll just share something that inspired me recently as far as art and cultural art. I had found on Facebook a photographer here in town, completely inspired by her work. I never really took the time to look at a picture and all the different things you could do with photography in a picture. So I was inspired, and I had gone on a trip last September. And I actually took the time to actually focus on what I was looking for and how someone else could see what I was seeing in a picture. And I took some truly amazing, amazing pictures, and it's all about being inspired. And I think you have the capability to inspire our youth. I mean, your enthusiasm comes forward as you talk to us tonight. So I don't know if that's an avenue you've pursued or something you might be interested in pursuing.
Well, actually, some of our grants go to the Southborough Library,
Okay.
where they host different classes for the youth. When we sent out our survey, maybe 16 months ago, there was a lot of interest for adults to take classes, to see exhibits, performances, and like that. Unfortunately, there's no space to hold classes. We could hold them at the library, but we're not allowed to charge, so then we can't pay the instructors. So there's all these pieces of the puzzle to bring together. But one of our committee, one who's on the council, is a teacher down at Neary,
Okay.
Denise Johnson. So she knows what's going on at the schools. She has input into the council and all of that. And the kids help out on art on the trails and like that.
Right.
Which, again, we send some grant money over for that. So, I think we're looking at all the different groups in town,
Yep.
adults as well as children, and trying to manage all of that.
Well, I think you're doing a great job, and I concur with Selectman Healy. Don't be afraid to bug us. Keep this on our radar. There's a lot of things that go on, and I think this is important as well. So please don't don't feel bad, send us a note, say, hey, any new thoughts on anything or whatever. We would appreciate the feedback. But again, you guys are doing a great job. Please continue.
Is there another group, maybe it's the Economic Development Council, or is there another group that we should as well be talking with about what we're doing in town and how we would like to
Speak to
be
that one.
part of the economic development and present some ideas about what we believe arts and culture can do for business development.
Yep.
Which can do quite a bit. Because we just kind of feel like we're out in the ocean with one oar, basically. Because there's all kinds of ideas, but again, when we can't charge anywhere in town, we have no way to get some revenue together to, take the ideas that we have and run with them, even as seed money, in the hopes of maybe getting a little bit more down the line. So we just want to know that the efforts of the council is something that the town wants. But we need, we'd like to see some, again, we can keep coming back for space or ideas for space, but we just really feel like we're out there and we're not really sure there's the level of support that we feel that we need, because it's a lot of work to follow through with some of these really terrific ideas, and not just ours either. We have lots of people come to us with ideas, and we'd love to do that, but it could be a full-time job if we really wanted to make it something.
And the first thing I'll say again is pester us about this, because, it really should be one of our responsibilities to make sure that, we're all volunteers.
Yeah.
And have a limited amount of time, and one of the things that can happen with that is you get siloed a little bit, and you're dealing just with your area, and you cannot know that. I can tell you again, my response to the events you had was I was very excited by it. It really, I hadn't thought of it before, but you realize that it wouldn't take a whole lot for there to be a vibrant sort of art scene in Southborough. I have mentioned this to the EDC a couple of times, because they really have taken some responsibility for trying to run with the ball for it. They call it a downtown initiative. And some folks, I'm one of them, are looking at it a little bit more broadly, and there are an awful lot of things that are happening in the town that your group could really tie into. The EDC initiative is really geared towards reinvigorating downtown Southborough. And obviously, the arts could be a big part of that. And so I will pester them again. You can pester me if you don't hear from them soon, but you can also reach out to them. And we've also talked, when we've talked to the EDC, it's trying to integrate, some groups that might not make an awful lot of sense initially, but like the Trails group, it sounds like you've been working with them. There's a big effort with them to tie the trails into sort of the downtown area. One sort of outside the box thought that someone had, they mentioned to me, was, the golf course is going to become a much more interesting place next year when all the construction is done, right, Chief? Yes, sir. And there's a potential arts component there. You can.
I had asked a few people along the way.
All right. Well,
You know,
somehow
could we use it off-season, because it's sitting there?
and it's ours.
Yeah.
It's ours now. So anyway, again, I don't want to take up a whole lot of your time with a little speech by myself, but I'm hearing what you're saying. I think a lot of people are hearing what you're saying. While you may be working, in isolation, again, the reaction to the events. Boy, the music at the things this summer. There were kids having the time of their life, and there were adults, who could actually identify the music. So I'm going to pester the EDC and some of the other groups. You keep pestering me, and maybe we can, sort of break down some of the silos and give you guys some room to run.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. We really
Mr.
appreciate it.
Stiles?
Thank you.
Yes, Mr.
Hang on,
Stiles.
before
Couple
you
of
guys.
comments, if I may. First, thank you for what you do. Great to get a little publicity. I think this is a good example of a group that I think a lot of people in town don't hear too much about. And hopefully there are a lot of people watching on the video or TV tonight to get a little more exposure. People touched on a couple of things. One is Youth and Family Services, which I think is an interesting way to integrate some of this. I think they do a lot of good work, and seems to me there's some opportunities to work more closely with them. In terms of space, I don't know what you're doing with the private schools in town. St. Mark's and Fay have some wonderful display space. Not sure what the economic opportunity is there, but they seem to be looking for ways to, again, find events to sponsor, so that might be an interesting conversation to have. One of the connections that I think is also useful, Lisa and I are serving on the master plan committee. We're updating the town's master plan from the 2008 version, and one of the key elements of that is what we're talking about, sense of community. And I think that what you folks do is a key element in that process. There are a lot of things that you could think about: recreation, other kinds of activities generate places where people actually get together and interact in ways that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And I think this is a great example. Library is another place that brings a lot of people together for various programs. I think the things that you folks do is another excellent example of ways that we can give people a chance to connect with others in settings and for purposes that wouldn't ordinarily happen in their lives. And I think all of that together makes for a very vibrant, diverse, and interesting community. And so I think this is one of the kind of things that we ought to push hard. Also, in little advertising, you talk about the grant programs. Could you give a few examples of grants that you provide if people out there watching might have interest in some of these things? What kind of things are they to look for? And before you answer that final point, I've floated the idea of a part-time grant writer for a town position. And I think there are a lot of grants that are potentially available if the town had the capacity to help groups like yours find and apply for grants like this. I think there's money out there to do this kind of stuff. And so this is another good example of a place where if we had a focused expert who knows how to do these kind of things to apply a little bit of time and effort, I think we could generate some interesting funding source for you. So thank you again for
Well,
what
thank
you
you
do.
for those comments. Yeah, we do it because we really have a passion for it, and we have a vision for what we think it really could bring to the community.
That's clear, because I know it's not for the money here. So,
No, it's no.
so examples of grants that
Just
you...
briefly, some of the grants, we do allocate money for the Messiah, which is held here at the
Yep.
Pilgrim Church, the Interboroughs Band, the summer concert series, like I said, the classes at the library. A few others are some dance programs, and what else?
So if there are groups who are interested in support for these kinds of things,
Any
check the
group,
website,
any
they can
individual
find you.
can apply.
Okay.
The applications are always due in October, and then we vote on them and distribute the money in the
Okay,
following
so-
year.
so they've got 6 or 7 months now to get ready.
Right.
Good. Right.
And
Thank
I'd
you again.
love to see another open mic night. I'd love to be able to
Oh,
attend.
Coming up in the
Terrific.
spring.
That would be
great.
wonderful.
Yeah, it was great. Great to see the kids so excited.
Yeah, absolutely. They were talking about it. The kids from the high school were talking about it. My son was telling me about it, so definitely positive.
Yes, we've called it South Union Open Mic.
Good, good.
You can follow it on
So
Instagram.
Mary, I think the best thing you did tonight was have one of your prospective new members have such an active part in the presentation and the update this evening to
Yeah.
demonstrate her knowledge of the council, her interest in the council. And one of the items on our agenda as well is for appointment of Lynn Davis to the Cultural Council through January 22nd, 2022. And I'll make the motion that this board make that appointment. And certainly if there are others that want to ask any questions, make any comments.
I'll second the motion.
So motion's moved, seconded. Any other comments, questions? I think you've done an excellent
Thank
job
you.
Yeah,
tonight
I don't know that
to
there's
demonstrate your
Anything further that I have to ask that you...
perfect candidate.
Thank you so much. I put together just a few very basic pieces of information about art councils, and put a couple of descriptions of some of our local towns' visions for their art council. So I'll just leave these with you
Great.
to breeze through. It's just like a two-page thing.
All right, let us vote first.
Let us vote first, exactly.
Yeah, you may want to take the paper and throw it away. So all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye, passes unanimously.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
the
for all you
update.
do.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
it.
Thank
volunteering.
you.
Please continue the great work.
Okay. Which brings us to the budget.
Our favorite topic.
Yay.
Mr. Valentine.
Hoping to be able to get this on the screen, so we'll just give it a minute. But in the meantime, I think you have the information I sent as an update to the budget from our discussion a couple weeks ago. There you go. It's just going to take probably 30 seconds or a minute to get up there. So we did go through, the town administrator and myself, and did a 5-year estimate based on, I believe it was Selectman Healy's request to do something that didn't have red in it, I guess was a simple way of putting it. So, let me just get this going. So we actually managed to do that, believe it or not. And let's see if this takes. So in the meantime, the budget that we proposed for this year, so we got two things, the 5-year estimate and the budget for this year. The budget for this year, actually it will be easier to see on the screen when we get up there. We're hoping we can at least maybe vote a budget in concept tonight, maybe not. But the 5-year plan, so there's some dips and valleys in the 5-year plan. Our levy capacity goes down to about 1.1 million next year, and then goes a little bit further down and sort of does some ups and downs, and it's pretty close to the levy limit in 24 and 26. In fact, in 26, it's only $20,000. So that is pretty thin with what we did. And there's only a couple ways you could, I don't know why this isn't connecting. We're having trouble with this a little earlier, so maybe it's gonna be a hard.
This is why we need more IT support.
That's, yes, actually. Keeps kicking me out. But the 5-year plan, so how we had to do it, you can actually come to a plan that's all blue, but you have to make certain assumptions and disciplines. And the highlight of that is we had to do operational budgets and school budgets at 3.5% cap for the years going out from FY '21 to, from FY '21 out to '26. So that's a hard cap. You'd have to maintain that, or you'd have to maintain that overall. There's also a few smaller assumptions in there with meals tax and small revenue growth. That's not as big a deal, but it certainly adds into it. The benefits and capital, benefits we just averaged out, so that was just an average. But the capital is to the capital plan, which I think I sent out the capital plan we used for this. And it's pretty consistent with the original capital plan. We didn't really remove things. There was a couple items in the outer years with the capital plan that were placeholders more than anything else. There were a couple places we had dollar amounts for departments wanted to hold in there for unexpected things or things they weren't quite sure of. They weren't specific items, so we got rid of them. Makes sense because they're just kind of there. But most of the other massaging we did with the capital was to some bond terms that we extended out just a little bit because they were fairly in the aggressive range to be paid back, so we lengthened those a little bit. And one big project that we did change, that the board probably would like to know about, is the transfer station, that we, instead of redoing the whole transfer station, we assumed just a new hopper in the transfer station. That was a $3 million difference in a project in the capital plan. So that made a huge difference in the debt repayment going forward. So all those things together, we were able to get it into, just gonna try this one more time. And then I'm gonna give up. We were able to get it into positive numbers. It's not coming up. I don't know why. So the base year this year, sorry about that, Mr. Healy. The base year this year, we kept for new hours in, I think that's one of the main things you want to talk about. The new hours we kept in was ADA committee, we still have half their request. Building department is, we're agreeing that that's probably a senior work-off program type thing. Conservation, we did allow the 3,000, which was an original request for them for a recording secretary. Council on Aging, we left alone. Fire department withdrew their.
So when you say council on aging, you left alone, you left in their request?
We left in their
amount?
request, yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry. Fire department, we left in their administrative request, which was about $4,800. As you know, the fire chief withdrew his request for the deputy. Library, we left alone also. MIS, we supported his part-time. Municipal tech, we reduced their request for an increase, since we haven't had any information on that. Police department, heavy lift this year. We did not support the 2 salaries with the associated benefits for the officers. My office supported and left in the part-time. Youth and family supported and left in 1 part-time. And the clinical supervision piece, which was another piece that department had requested. So we felt that was kind of a fair approach to it. The tax rate, and this may be slightly different than yours, and I hope not, but it might be, is 3.61% increase, which leaves us with about 2.725 million in levy capacity. Maybe slightly different because this is like every day we get new information. We did have bad news about Norfolk Agricultural, that we actually have 2 applicants this year, which is good news and bad news. Good news for kids, bad news financially. That's about $89,000 we had to put in the budget. At the same time, we had some offsetting revenue that we updated for the 911 field and the ambulance fund that almost wiped all that out. So it's almost a wash. Other than that,
And just so I'm on the same
Yep.
page, so the information that was sent in our packet shows within the levy this year of 2.749 million. We're now projecting that to be
2725,
2.2725.
slightly different.
Yep.
And as you know,
Meeting years stay blue.
yes, barely, but yes, yes, that is correct.
And down about that same 20,000 each year?
Yes, yes, correct.
Okay.
So it's
Last year then is,
the last year is
pretty much
basically a
even,
wash, right,
yep.
isn't even. Obviously, it's a pretty tight forecast. There's really no other way you can get to it by having some type of budget cap, which we haven't had in a while. We have had it in the past, but we haven't had it in a while. And, going forward, obviously, tonight or down the road, if the board so inclines to add anything to this, it's just gonna roll forward, as you know. So if the board decides they wanna support additional items, that's fine, but just know it's gonna roll that down the train, and we'll just have to address it again. So I was hoping tonight we could at least maybe draft a budget in concept. And what I mean is, we can't draft a final budget tonight anyways, because there will be changes from now until the next few weeks with certain departments. I do know we have reached out about the stipends that Selectman Calendar requested. And the responses I've got has been no change recommended to them. So we've done is, we've reached out, and that's basically, we haven't heard from everyone, but that's so far. Open Space has just emailed us tonight that they would like to visit you on their own, so you could certainly do that and talk with them at your convenience. Other than that, we have supported most of the capital, as you've seen, for this year. If there's anything in there you see that you'd like further information, we can certainly do that. But it would help at least if we could get the framework of this budget voted, so we can, the major corners of it, so we can at least move forward a little more, tightening this down as we go along, since we're running out of time, fortunately.
You got a comment?
Any comments,
Yeah, I got
questions?
some
Mr.
comments.
Stivers, please.
I was interested in Mr. Healy's proposal to take a look at what it takes to get to this point. I think that's a good starting point for discussion. But also, as I've commented previously, I think there are some things that, in my view at least, are the right things to do here. And personally, I'm prepared to accept a little bump in the tax rate to do those kind of things. My number is about $200,000 on this list of things that I think are important to do, to try to find a way to get back in. And one of the things that I look at here is you've put an assumption in that everybody's going at 3.5% increase during this period, including the schools. The schools are obviously a huge portion, over 2/3 of the total budget. I think they've been under that 3.5% recently here, in part because of things that, like the allocation for the Algonquin, Northborough has been picking up more of that. I think there's some chance going forward, and I'm willing to bet a little bit at least on the fact that they're going to be able to continue keeping under that to give us a little bit of additional cushion. So, I mean, the things on my list, for example, on the areas that have been cut, I think that I'd support the ADA budget. I'd support the building department hours. I'd support conservation admin, particularly, as a matter of fact, and also municipal tech committee. Not a lot of money, but I think there are a lot of things they can be doing and should be doing to really leverage that kind of number. I think the police positions are important, which is the big piece here. And youth and family, I think that we've had a lot of conversation about that. I think the full-time admin position is something that makes a lot of sense there, and frankly, it's a safety and a liability issue as well, in the sense of the folks that they deal with as clients and the risk to the staff there. I think it's an important thing to have on the table. So my number is about $200,000 here in the near term, roughly, to find a way to get back in, and then work hard to keep that under control and as we go forward here, and hope that we get a break with particularly schools as far as their ability to hold within the target number, and also pursue some additional sources of revenue. I know Mr. Healy's been working on the pilot conversations, and it is not unreasonable to expect that there may be some success there going forward. And again, nothing certain, but I think there's enough uncertainty and opportunity out there that I'm personally at least willing to make a bet that we can fund some of these important things for FY21 and continue to make it fit within the cap going forward. And if that doesn't turn out to be the case, then we got to tighten the belt and pay the price there. But I think there's a good chance, in my personal view, that we can make that work. So that's sort of where I start in terms of the process here.
Ms. Braccio.
Thank you. I'm on the same page with Sam to some degree, except I look at it a little bit differently. When I look at the budget and the things that are important and where we're at now, I look at, if we want to add something back in, where are we going to take it from? I look at sustainability. I know some of the things that have been taken out, for instance. I look at some of the capital items that came out of this, that are things that, Brian, maybe you can tell me. The DPW floor coverings, they reduced by 15.5. How many years has that been an ask for? Guesstimate, just a guesstimate.
Year at the I don't remember going back more than a year.
Okay.
Do you?
What about the painting and the maintenance repairs for South Union?
Same thing.
Okay. Is there any on here, because I thought the library has been on the list since
Library's
I've been on the
list,
board.
yes. several
And
years.
that's,
Yes.
where is that? I don't have it. What did I do with it? Yeah, it's 115,000.
Correct.
So that's been on the list for X number of
Correct.
years. And I always go back to, it's important to do the maintenance items because down the road, it's gonna cost you more. You know, I use the library roof as an example, you know? And, every year the price of this goes up, and I'm assuming probably when it was first on the budget, when I was here, it was a lot less, not a lot less, but anything is a lot, maybe $100,000. I think it was 85 maybe or
The
something when I
windows
first got.
were like 450 or when we started, now they're
Right.
675.
So I'm trying to weigh the
Good point.
capital items that have been out here that need to be done for maintenance versus some of the hours or the positions that we're looking to do, and still keep those numbers down. If we had the library back in, on top of potentially $200,000 in more salary, we're now at $350,000, and we're looking at almost 1% added back on the tax rate. I think we have a big challenge on our hands. I support a lot of the things that Sam said, but I'm just trying to find a way to get there and sustain it based on, we don't know what the revenues are. And I still look at, we had $450,000 estimated new revenue next year, and, you know, we're already way over and adding things that need to be done to that. So, I'm interested to hear kind of where the rest of the board stands on this. I don't have an answer for this tonight, but I worry in adding additional things and where we maybe should be taking it out. And believe me, there's not a whole lot in this budget to take things out of other than capital. I mean, that's realistic.
Unfortunately, I don't know of a lot of things that are gonna change much either. We're talking about, there are gonna be changes, but
Yeah.
the regional may go down a little more, which may help us a little bit. It's not gonna be hundreds of thousands.
But you
The,
just,
the remaining issues, or the handful of issues, just aren't gonna help a lot unless we get totally some unexpected news somewhere,
and I think there are
fortunately.
important positions on here that I wish we could fund them all. I do. I just don't think, looking at the forecasted future, that it's where I really need to go in increasing taxes for these positions. So, again, interested to hear what everybody else's thoughts are.
A number of things. First of all, this is terrific work, and getting the numbers in the position. Is it showing up there now? Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
it did.
See, all I had to
Just
do.
as soon as you get up there.
All I had to do was move back here, and it was going to be behind me. I'm with Ms. Braccio on this. I am, with our tax rate, I'm unwilling to take a leap that something's going to happen, that it's going to make things better. And so as a result, if there are positions or capital projects or otherwise that we want to put back into the budget, I mean, I really think it's beholden on us to not simply, Sam, say, things are going to be good, we'll figure out a way, but to identify a way to at least on paper, have a budget that doesn't project us going into the knowing we're going to be going into the red in the near future. I think it's going to be worth a discussion. I know that from some quick conversations with some folks on advisory, that I know you met with them, Mark and Brian, last week, that they have some views, some of them perhaps differing than our current view, at least the way it's put down on paper. And so I think there's probably some push and pull coming on that. One of the more general things that was floated, and I don't know if this gives us a potential better window into the possibility that things could change, and obviously they could change for the worse, but looking at it with a glass half full for the better, the possibility, are there some things, if we were going to think about doing an annual town meeting and following it up with a town meeting in the fall, are there things that could be delayed until the fall, which would give us a clearer view, hopefully, of where we are from a financial standpoint, but also might just inform us better in terms of whether or not we want to take a jump in terms of some capital, as well as some hours. And I think there are also some other items that might be included in an autumn town, special town meeting as well. So that being said, that's a 25,000 feet. I think you've done a terrific job getting this to a point where on paper, it's always on paper, the red projecting forward is eliminated. Our tax rate is driven down more than it was, in a way that I think most of the taxpayers are going to find more acceptable. And Sam, I don't disagree with you that there are a number of particularly hours that are certainly worthwhile, and various departments have made very strong cases for those. But I really think if we're going to put additional stuff back into the budget, that it's beholden on us to explain what we're taking out, or why we shouldn't take anything out. And I don't think we're there yet.
So again, thank you for doing these scenarios. And again, I had also asked Mr. Ballantyne to run the scenario by adding in the Youth and Family Services position plus one police officer as well. And I know, and as you went through, I know there was the initial list of requested hours, which I think totaled 5.5 full-time equivalents.
Yes.
Initially, when it was requested, and that obviously had its projections showing that we were in the red very quickly to very significant
Correct.
extremes. So this scenario also does project negative situations as well. And again, I don't want to be in an area where we're adding positions only to have to consider cutting them in future years as well. Certainly the magnitude that these negatives came to were far less than the initial scenario with all
Right.
the requested full-time equivalents. I think as you looked at all the requested additional hours, I think police wound up getting some of the administrative support that they were looking for.
Fire.
The
Fire department, yes.
I'm sorry, I mixed those up.
Yes,
Fire.
that is correct.
But the full deputy position,
Was
eliminated.
removed, yes.
this also eliminates both police officers that were requested
Correct.
as well.
Correct.
And it almost seems as though all the other, compromises at least resulted in some additional hours for
Yep.
those other groups.
Yep.
And, while I'm not in full agreement, Sam, with the list that you had, I would prioritize at least the addition of one police officer in that group. And if we can find a way to get at least one of those positions in, to again show, and it's not to say that there isn't anything else that, we may need to help carve out to help make it more palatable, but I think that's one area where that I personally would like to see where we could make happen.
Quick question on that. Is what we're looking at up here, Brian, is that, it says one youth and family, one
part-time?
part-time.
Part-time
That's
or
already in
full-time?
what we're looking at with the,
Is that in addition to this?
No, that's in addition, I'm sorry.
That's
It is a little
effectively-
confusing, yes, it's adding another
That's
part-time.
it's like they're
effectively
Another
full-time.
part-time.
Two part-time, yeah.
okay.
But not a full-time with
Not a
benefits?
full-time, not a full-time.
Okay. Which is what I think they
So
need.
in all likelihood, if it was just the police and not the additional part-time, those two red numbers would still be red, but not.
It'd
to
still
the
be red.
magnitude
Yeah.
Close, but red.
Because they're, because
It'd be a little different, it would be a little bit of a different annual budget that we're used to, because being against the levy limit like that, even close, is a little different than having 2.6 or 2.9 million dollars.
Right.
It becomes a little bit different, because then it's not an exercise. Then now the board doesn't have a choice. Some of the options that we're talking about now, we can't even talk about them. They're not gonna happen. If we were having this discussion in FY '24 and it was right there,
You got
you'd be
hard cap.
cutting something.
In terms of timing, so the assumption, looking at that, we don't have the numbers in front of us, but obviously
Sure.
the assumption is that if you didn't add the second set of part-time hours for youth and family services, but added one police officer, that the blue numbers would go up at least a little bit in the blue years, and the red numbers would go down at least a little bit in the red years.
Right.
All right. If we were, I guess a couple of questions, and maybe Brian or for Mark, if you were to address youth and family services with one part-time at the annual town meeting, what impact would that have on your flexibility to either add an additional part-time if there were an autumn town meeting, or to roll that into a full-time position in a fall town meeting? Or is that just purely hypothetical?
No. The part-time you could do. The problem with the full-time is they would probably hire a for them, it might be a little more difficult because they would hire a part-time.
If you were gonna
It
do
may
a
not
full,
be the
if you're
same
gonna do a
person that wants to
full-time,
go
I
to-
think you do it now.
Yeah, I would say
If you were
do it
gonna
now.
keep it two part-timers, then you could split it.
Yes.
I think one thing to point out, and again, it's kind of illustrated here, with this exercise, those red numbers have gotten a lot smaller than they were, right? They're kind of manageable numbers.
Right.
But as Brian said, the thing to understand is those numbers put you up against the cap. You don't have any room. So we have to know, going into FY '24, for example, here, we've got to make sure that we're going to somehow, assuming everything else holds true, we've got to cut about $70,000 out of that budget just to get under the cap, assuming there's no new revenues. I don't know if I blanked out for a minute, so I apologize if I did. I don't know if Brian mentioned, so most of the stuff, the information for the budget this year has rolled right. We had one roll really wrong. Did you mention that already?
Norfolk?
With the Norfolk?
Yes,
with the
yes, I did.
students?
I did.
I apologize.
I gave
Okay?
that bad
That's
news up
another
the front.
$90,000 that didn't roll
Yeah.
the right way.
We're lucky.
Thursday, Brian will go to the Worcester County Retirement meeting to get our assessment number. They give you breakfast, and then you try to hold it down while they give you your new number. They did some reassessing last year, and that number was not good for us. Hopefully, that's a little bit of leveling out. The other information hopefully will come the end of this week or so from the governor, and we'll see what he sets the floor at for local aid, and what difference some of the gambling revenue, as well as some of the marijuana revenue may make in our numbers. The good news is probably we'll see a little more local aid. The bad news is they may assess us a few more charges, so they'll give and then they'll take back a portion of. So we'll see how that rolls. Not to be pushy, but I'm gonna be pushy. We don't have a whole lot of meetings left to figure this out. So if the board is not prepared to make any decisions or set any, anything that you really want to do or that you don't, we've heard some things tonight, there's got to be some definites as to what you need in order to make a decision. I think Brian and I are just kind of where we are now. We're not sure, where to go with this. If you do want to add a police officer, if you want to add 2 police officers, if you want to add all 5.5 FTE that everybody was looking for, you know what it means. You know where it's going to put you, and you know what challenges you're going to have to face in the out years. Even though that number is blue for fiscal '22, that still means using, $1.6 million in levy capacity. That's inherently about, 4%, Brian?
Yes.
4% on the tax rate, using that levy capacity. So, we can do it, yes, but '22 is gonna be a tough year. And I know that sometimes, you've got the money, let's do it, and then we'll figure it out. Well, I just want you to understand, I think you've got some idea now what that roll ahead is gonna look like, in terms of some of our debt our debt issues. And again, holding to that fiscal discipline that Brian has put in as the parameters for making some of this stuff work.
But Mark, I guess I would, to address that and Marty's point as well, I think from a practical standpoint, we are dealing with forecasts here. And so I look at this as sort of like the forecast for the hurricane charts, where the farther out you are, the wider the cone is in terms of what could happen. And I give you guys full credit for doing a good job in terms of your best estimate on the forecast, but a lot of things can happen. And I mean, I do this kind of stuff on my day job regularly, and at least the model that I think makes sense in a lot of circumstances is you make your best assumption, you do the things that you think are right, and then you go along and continually reassess and say, okay, how are we doing? And get to FY '22, '23. If things are going against us, then we got to make some hard decisions. I think there's a reasonable chance here that there will be things that break in our favor going forward. And that's the trade-off that I think each of us has to make sort of in our own heads as far as what kind of risk do you take, what do you ask the taxpayers to pay for. And I think there is enough opportunity at least that things may turn out that we can do some of these things that we're talking about here, that we've heard good cases made for, and reassess as we go along versus trying to believe that this is the likely outcome going forward, and we're going to have to tighten our belts now to do it. So that's, to me, the choice that you have to make. And,
But
I guess from my perspective-
just one Mr. Stivers, just one comment. I'm not comfortable, though, going forward and budgeting on hope.
Yeah.
I hope our revenues are gonna be here. I've done 26 years of budgeting, and I've yet to have a revenue deficit. I really don't wanna start now. We're assuming the meals tax in these numbers. We're assuming some things roll good for us. We've been on the right side of an awful lot of things, whether it's our health insurance increases, because a lot of hard work and due diligence, and we've been on the right side of the Algonquin enrollment numbers, simply because we're lucky. And I want to make sure that, again, this is going to be a year-to-year thing. We're going to have to reevaluate. We haven't seen, the impact of the medical marijuana payments yet. What do those mean? How is the board going to, look to assign some of that mitigation money? And again, that can only be used a year after it's come in, because as mitigation money, it's got to be closed out to free cash and then certified and then it's available for use. So, like I said, I think there's got to be a certain level of conservatism. In conversations and working with Kathy, we've loosened up the belt a little bit, to try to be reasonable. But there isn't a whole lot of fat, isn't a whole lot of fluff in here. And so we just need to be careful of what we do and the unintended consequences.
I'm not suggesting there's fluff. Yeah.
And from my experience, having been on the advisory committee in this board for as long as I have more faith and confidence in Mr. Ballantyne's skills and abilities in his position over meteorologists in theirs. So,
Me too, as a
these
matter of fact.
projections are a little more accurate than scatter plots for hurricane maps, so.
Yeah, Sam, I'm fine basing decisions based on projections, but based on projections that might get projected is a risk I'm not comfortable taking on behalf of the taxpayers. So again, I go back to my point. If there are some favorable assumptions that we can identify that are tangible, that's one thing. And this I find very helpful. And again, I don't like the $66,000 figure or the $99,000 figure, but that's a lot different than the several $1 million we were looking at the last time we sat down. So the one thing, going back to the Youth and Family Services, is there a sense if a full-time position were put in instead of 2 part-time positions, how much would that likely affect FY24 and FY26?
So let me ask Brian a question. So are we assuming that the benefits that are being lost based on the retirement are now a savings? Retirement down in nurse.
Oh, no.
So
So that doesn't affect the
so
benefits
you haven't
line.
accounted for those.
No.
Okay.
No.
Right, so then you would be adding, about another 20,000.
Yeah,
$22,000
somewhere around 22, 22.
onto that number
Mm.
for the benefits piece.
Okay. And just, okay, and just in terms of, I think maybe because I was focusing so much on the deficits that were looming in
Yeah.
some of the years coming up, I'm now focusing on FY '22, and in some respects, shame on me, but we're talking about what appears to be baked in, a $4 million increase in the budget?
4%.
4%, yeah, not 4 million.
56 to 60.
Well, 3.2 million or $3.3 million dollars.
Oh, and the total expenditures?
Total expenditures,
3.2.
as opposed to about $1 million from last year to this year.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay, you need a mic, Kathy, sorry.
But I want to know what you
Yeah,
said.
no, go to a mic, please.
And a lot of that is due to debt.
Yeah, the debt
Debt
coming on.
service.
Oh, no, I understand that it's, that, the debt is driving it, but it's driving a pretty big number.
It is.
Correct.
Ms. Cook.
So can I say, I promise I won't say much else, but it's fiscal year '22 that is your big problem. Look at the tax rate increase you're going to have for that year. It's going to be 8% year over year. So Sam, you're worried about, worried about too far in the future. That's only 1 year from now, so that's the worst year by far, as far as the increase in expenses. So if you don't do something now, you're going to bake that in, and it really is going to be a problem. So I do think that we really got to focus on the things you're talking about, but with capital being the one that we really got to focus on, because that's what's driving these. Advisory's got some ideas too, and I'm happy to at least tell you where I think we are if you want to hear, but that's the
Yeah,
key.
I'd be
Please,
interested.
I'd be
yeah.
interested as well.
Yep.
Yes.
So, we haven't voted, so I'm speaking for myself as chair right now, but I think I know kind of where we're going to come down. We actually think that we should have a special town meeting that is going to focus on at least two things that we know of. One is capital. So we're hoping that you do reinvigorate the capital budget committee, and I'm hoping that Jason Malinowski, who seems to really want to do this, is appointed as chair, because I think he could do a really good job, and that's all their focus, and I think they could probably come up with some creative ways to lower these numbers and still do what the town should do. But if you look at the capital budget, there's a lot of things in there that you might not do if you decide to do something else. And so that's why I hate to do those now, because I think we might change our mind and do something where the money kind of got thrown away. For example, if they go back and look at the schools again and say, the work that was done a few years ago where we decided that we really could, we thrive with 3 schools, which we did, that's what the committee concluded. We were just afraid to take that step at that point because we didn't have Woodward paid off. They may come back and do that, and that would change a whole lot of things on the capital if we decided to do that. It would save $400,000 a year in operating expenses and would change a lot of things on this capital plan. The second thing is EDC met with us the last time we met, and they clearly are not ready for town meeting as far as what they're proposing specifically. We just think they're going to not necessarily get it passed because they're not ready to present it and explain it coherently. We think there's a lot of support and concept for what they want to do, and if they really want to get it done, they need more time to get it ready.
And is that the overlay district that you
Yes.
specifically?
Yes, yes. Yeah. So, I mean, they tried really hard that night to explain it, but they're not ready. They haven't had anybody really look at what their language is. Aldo hasn't looked at it. They've got money to hire an attorney, but they haven't, so it's basically the product of them putting this together, and they're not attorneys, and they really don't have the ability to make it necessarily legally sound. So we're sympathetic with what they want to do, but the way it was explained to us, I don't know that it's going to pass town meeting, because I don't think they can explain it in a way that might generate the 2/3 of support they're going to need, and there's going to be people that are going to oppose it. So we think those two things would be really good things to have a special town meeting, that would be our focus. But that fiscal year '22 is going to be next year, and so we got to do something this year, or are we really going to get stuck with what's on that one?
Does this include, do your projections include an increase in the meals tax? The state law allows for another bump in that meals tax if we want to do that.
Mark, are you sure you mean what he says? He's talking about it going from 0.75 to 1.5, and we didn't include that because.
No,
It hadn't passed yet. We've called, and it's still a sitting committee, so it hasn't passed. So we have not included, we're still using the .75, so it would double it if we voted to pass it and then voted to double it. So we have not included the 1.5.
Yeah, Kathy, thanks for punctuating the fiscal '22. As I said, we were, my eyes had wandered, towards the red, but when you come back to, it's next year where there's a large wave coming that there's not a whole lot we can do about.
And I meant to mention that Kathy's exactly right. It doesn't show the tax rate impact on this. And
Yes,
It'll
we're
be
focused on we're focused on the levy capacity, but you kind of convert that to a tax rate increase
It's
too,
about 8%.
and it's huge.
Yeah.
Kathy, while you're up there, I wasn't at your meeting, but I had heard from some people that were there, and I know you guys are coming up with some really innovative ideas, trying to look at things and ways to maybe do things a little different than we've done them in the past. So I want to thank you for that, because it was really positive feedback I heard from people that were at the meeting. The fire truck was one, and looking at different avenues, and instead of maybe buying a truck now, buying something a little, not new, but, fewer years down the road, and it's less expensive to the taxpayers today. So again,
Well, it puts the two trucks 10 years apart too, so if they're 20-year life, it gets them so that they are turning over at the right time, so that's what it would accomplish too.
so it's things like that. So I thank you, and I thank advisory for that, because again, at the end of the day, we're all volunteers, and different people think outside of the box in different ways. So it was great things that I had heard from your meeting, so I just wanted to say that to you.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it.
So what is it you wanted from us?
Consensus, I think, which is
So,
clearly.
Well,
I mean, we
if
need-
if the board felt that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but if the board certainly felt that, we have to have one officer, we're not gonna change our minds, we're gonna find a way to do it. We have to have a youth and family, we're not gonna change our minds. There's no point in at least, we might as well at least vote that and put it in the numbers and then follow up and try to figure things out more, I guess. I don't know. At least it's a decision to have some parameters around stuff. But maybe the board hasn't reached that point either, so.
So where have we reached?
That's where I am. I'd like to have two police officers, but it sounds like there's one here, so.
So let me start with I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Let me start with an easy one. Can the board galvanize around the concept of no new hours, no new positions in fiscal '22 without any new sustainable revenue source to support those hours and positions?
Yes,
Good suggestion.
For fiscal '22?
22.
Yeah. So
Yes,
I really,
That seems easy.
and I would appreciate a vote of the board on that, because that is gonna make everything much easier when it comes to next year. I think, Mr. Ballantyne and I have talked
Yeah.
about this, that, obviously, I mean, we've talked about 22 now for about 5 or 10 minutes. 22 is really the elephant, and I think that if you set that out now, because I think there are some departments that have plans that, okay, well, whatever we get this year, what we don't get, we'll get it next year. We're gonna do this for next year. I think the board needs to set that tone and set that policy decision now, so we can take those items off the table for those new items that people may want next year.
But that's a good concept, but that depends on the assumptions for those sustainable revenue sources. So for example, what do you assume for new growth? What do you assume for the meals tax? Other revenue sources out there, and, different people can have different assumptions about that. So that still, in my mind at least, leaves some degree of uncertainty there. I mean, I think that it's easy to buy off on the concept, but the devil's in the details, as they say. So, I mean, I'm willing to support the concept, but I think there's a lot of conversation to be had around, now you.
Well, obviously, if meals tax goes up to, if we agree
Right.
to go up to 1.5, that's a new identifiable sustainable revenue source that you can then do something with.
I was gonna say, you're saying the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. At
Sam's
least I heard
Sam's
you-
just hedging his bets a little bit more.
No, but I also think, you got some assumptions in there for what are the meals revenues gonna be that you apply that tax rate to.
Right.
And again, that's, in my view, at least a projection that we can make our best guess at, but there's
Right.
no certainty around it.
I would love to be able to, I'm sorry, Ms. Braccia, I would just love to be arguing about, is this a new revenue source or not?
Right.
Okay, I think that'd be a great discussion to have.
Yeah.
I'm basing my comments on what I see before me now. So I completely agree that we should, based on the information that we have, looking at 2022 now. I think we are right to take this position. Can we change the position? Of course you can. You know, this board can vote to change their position at any time, but I think going in to this town meeting and any taxpayer that's watching it on TV, I think it sends a clear message of how serious this board is taking it and where we stand. And I think it gives our finance team kind of a path going forward. And I think, Sam, that's all it is. I don't know that we're committing, well, we are committing by saying it, but things can change, and if the revenues do change, then we can change our position. But I do think it's important that we take this position now, and I think it benefits the taxpayers at home to know that, you know, they have a board, they have an advisory that's, you know, looking down the road to the future to what the potential increases may be.
Is that a motion?
Sure. You want me to say it again? Oh, no. Mr. Healy, you make the motion, how's that? You love to make motions.
I move that we accept Mr. Purple's recommendation, well articulated,
Yeah.
that the board take the position that for fiscal year '22, our current plan is to not add any new positions or hours unless there is a clearly identifiable revenue stream, new revenue stream that can support those.
Second, well said.
Moved.
Discussion?
Motion was made, seconded. Mr.
Discussion?
Stivers.
Yeah, I guess it's a great concept. It sounds great, makes good, common sense. On the other hand, I think there are some things that we need to consider doing that we can find other ways to get done. Like, we just talked about the police position and the youth and family services position. I think that there are some things, again, you just ought to do and rebalance other things that are tied to other revenue sources to find ways to get that done. So, with that caveat, I'm supportive of the concept, but I think it's easy to vote on something that sounds good but doesn't really address some of the fundamental program things that we ought to be doing. So that's my thought on that. Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion?
Well, I'm not sure how good it sounded when I made the motion, but again, I don't think we're saying anything different.
No, I agree.
If it turns out that all of a sudden some projected expense that doesn't exist, we can revisit it and even consider that another revenue source because the expense doesn't exist.
Yep.
But I mean, basically, it is. I think, Mark, that what you're looking for from us is a message that you can carry to the departments saying that fiscal year '22 is going to be a very, very difficult year. The Board of Selectmen has punctuated how difficult it's going to be by taking this stand as far as likely increases in hours and positions.
That's exactly correct.
And as long as I can remind you that you said we're saying the same thing when we disagree about a particular funding point, I'm supportive. Thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously.
Can I
All
just
right.
ask, Kathy, when is advisory
So
meeting
there's that.
next, if I may, Brian? Okay.
So where does
Okay,
that leave
28th.
us? Where does that leave us in terms of the points that we were talking about here for guidance for Mr. Ballantyne and Mr. Purple? Do you think you have marching orders for the next step in this process? Or?
No. No. I was just telling the chair, I just had a ladybug land on my papers after you took the vote. I think that's a good sign. So if I can get a couple more to land here tonight, I think we'll be.
Was she carrying a
Yeah,
four-leaf
so-
clover?
But, I guess in all seriousness, Mrs. Stivers, I just don't know, I think Mr. Ballantyne said, if you want to see a new police officer in here, if you want to see a full-time youth and family services person, if there are definites of things that you want in here, if you want to see us maintaining our OPEB contribution, you don't want that cut. If you want to, I guess just certain guidelines, which then gives us some definites and, some areas that are still up for discussion.
I mean, those are definites in my book, but I don't know how others feel about those. So.
They're not definites in mine. I'm not sure. Maybe you need a motion. I'm not sure if you do. If you have a pretty clear idea of where various people stand, I mean, what you've accomplished with the revisions that you've done from our last meeting to this, which includes additional hours for youth and family services and a single additional police officer, I think is a terrific effort. I will tell you, I am wary of adding any new positions, looking at what those numbers are for fiscal year '22. And so while I'm there right now, as we've got additional discussions coming up with advisory, and, you know, the numbers are gonna marinate a little bit longer. Right now, I am supportive of those positions in the budget projections that you put up there, but I'll tell you, I'm still very wary of it with, as I said, I'm kicking myself, the focus was extended out, you know, 3, 4, 5 years, and really, it's coming home a lot quicker than that. It's coming home the next fiscal year.
Well, even without the new positions, it's a $3.2 million increase in the expenditures.
Yeah.
For next year as well.
So I'm there right now. So in terms of clarity, at least in terms of my position, I'm there right now. I think the work you've done is excellent. I think it is terrific if we can in fact figure out a way to add those hours and that position, given the challenges that we face and are about to face. So that's where I am right now.
I'm kind of on the same page as Selectman Healy. I mean, this was a lot of discussion tonight. I am completely on board with what's up on the screen today, but I'd still like to look at other ways that we can still get there without adding additional increase. So I'm kind of on the same page as
And just to
Healy is.
remember too, I know that, you know, and I think Selectman Healy said it best, is that, you know, you're taking the long view and looking at that, and now we're focusing back on 22.
Yep.
We're asking you to approve 21, just with the understanding of what approving 21 means and what it does rolling forward.
I'd be curious, for instance, if a police officer isn't added in this budget, I would assume the overtime numbers are gonna go up.
Yes.
And I'd like to know kind of an analysis of, what are we talking, apples and oranges here, or apples and apples? Can we get a read before our next meeting of kind of what that number is? Because if it's a wash, I mean, I don't know why we're kind of extending this conversation on this piece a little bit. So if we could just get those numbers from the chief, I would appreciate what that would be. I think it would have an impact in my thought process a little bit.
So you want to know what adding an officer will do?
Well, right, what the cost would be to add an officer, or if we don't, what the additional overtime cost. I know the chief's very good about giving overtime back at the end of the year, so what would the additional cost in overtime be if we don't? It's kind of an offset, just to see.
So if we don't add an officer and the chief
Correct.
continues with his
Correct,
plan to have 3 officers on each shift,
correct.
I guarantee you he's not giving back overtime.
Well, I know, well, that's the question,
But,
so.
and then no, and your point is good, and, you know, and the chief and I have had some discussions about that, you know, and, all, you know, officers, you know, and I think either blue, red, all like overtime to a certain extent.
Well,
So then, you know,
agreed.
you know, we don't want it to become an issue of having to fill, you know, and you can't find people to fill those overtime shifts.
Agreed,
But
I-
again, yes, we can
it's-
absolutely,
It's useful information to have.
Yep.
That's all.
yep, no, we can get those numbers for you.
Thank you.
And just very quickly, Brian and Mark, the chief of police is sitting over there, and I'm hoping you realize that we are doing. I mean, you've done an incredible juggling act with what I think what at least I recognize is a staff that could use a couple of additions. If in fact we're not able to give you those couple of additions this year, that doesn't mean, at least from my perspective, that it's not an acknowledgement of, number one, the job you've done doing that juggling, but also that we're going to have to figure out a way to get that staffing to you at some point in the future.
Okay. So we've had a decent discussion on this so far tonight. We are fast approaching the deadline where we have to have a final budget recommended to go into the warrant. Is it worth considering taking the first Tuesday in February as a meeting dedicated to the budget? No other appointments?
Yep.
Items, and let's just meet again, focused on the budget, and
That's the
see if we
4th.
can get, that would be the 4th of
Okay.
February.
I'm fine.
See if we can
Yep.
get,
Yep.
Yes.
And I pointed to Ms. Cook because obviously it would be beneficial to have advisory there.
And they're meeting anyway, so.
Are you meeting on the 4th?
Yep,
Uh,
every
no,
Tuesday.
Next week,
we're up,
28th.
Okay.
So that might be really good.
Through with all of our budgets next week, so we're done.
so you're done meeting with everybody?
Yeah,
So-
but the only thing, Brian, we won't have time, I don't think, we'll have a little time to maybe talk after the meeting, so I'll try to find a way that we can talk before we come to your meeting, so we kind of have an idea.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Kathy, you gotta use the mic.
So I think it works. We'll be through, we're just doing the schools, that's all we're doing next week. Of course, that's a big one, though. But so what we'll do is do the schools, and at the end of the meeting, we'll try to come together as far as what we think, and then be ready to come in and listen to what you guys say on the 4th, and be ready to chime in if you want us to.
That would be great.
Why don't we plan that then? And again,
Okay,
4th would just be limited to budget
Perfect.
only.
good.
Yep, that's great.
You doing anything that night, Brian?
Thank you,
I am
Kathy.
now.
Awesome.
If
Great.
there's any information, if there's anything that you're looking for
Yes,
between
Send it to
now
us.
and then, as much ahead of
Sounds
time
good.
as you can.
We'll let you know, for
And if
sure.
Kathy can carry that back to her troops, if
Yep.
there's any information that you want, please let us know so that we can try and make that as robust a meeting as possible.
absolutely.
Robust.
Okay,
Yep.
Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate the scenarios that you'd run for us, they're very helpful. Town Administrator's Report.
Mr. Chairman, just one item. I wanted to just give the board a little bit of an update on the warrant. I passed out tonight the latest iteration. I will send that out electronically. That's latest as of this afternoon. Right now, you have 35 articles. You have the likelihood of a 36th. Town clerk's office is just certifying the signatures from Mr. Lepine's submitted citizen petition for a noise bylaw. But you have the draft language for the most part in here for the other articles. We are missing the CPA. CPA has not met, so I don't have that language yet. I am kind of leaning a little bit on them to get me the language. I think that Mr. Ballantyne and Ms. Krieger could pretty much put together what the CPA administrative, the Burnett House bond, and the library facade bond would be, but we do not have the information yet on the two proposed projects for Calander Field and the St. Mark's Church bell tower. But a lot of the language is in here. The MSBA project, which is Article 16 for the Finn School boiler, that has been reviewed by bond counsel for borrowing. And so, you know, we're in good shape with that. Town council has been given the 4 articles which are before planning board for their consideration. The zoning bylaw articles 30, 31, 30, 31, 32, 33, and also, I'm sorry. Somehow I put Mr. Hegarty's article in the middle. I gotta switch that around. I'm trying to be deferential and get you the hell out of there, so you're not in the middle of the zoning stuff. I'm gonna move him out. Anyway, so the zoning articles, I'm sorry, 30, 32, 33, and 34. Town council has, I've asked him to take a 30,000-foot view. I don't want him spending a lot of time, because obviously these probably are gonna change through the hearing process. We did receive something, late this afternoon from town council that I did submit to the board. It was a procedural question that was asked by Ms. Braccio to understand with regards to the EDC zoning bylaw, do we have any process, questions or concerns regarding that bylaw, the way it is moved from this point to planning. I'm not going to speak to, like I said, we just got this afternoon. I passed it on to the board. I did pass it on to EDC to make them aware. I'm sure there may be additional questions that come from this. I also made sure the planner had it. And, we'll see where that shakes out.
But again, to Ms. Cook's point that she had made, I mean, this identifies that the proposed zoning bylaw change ought to have been acted on by this board before going to the planning board, which has not happened. So the letter outlines a number of ways in which this document can make its way to the planning board public hearing, none of which have been met properly. So we will need to consider it, having our board review it and act on it, but even if we did so, we would need to question whether that leaves us enough time for this to make it properly into the warrant for the March, or for the annual town meeting, or is this something that is better suited towards a special in the fall?
And something like this could dovetail into what Ms. Cook was talking about with regards to a capital committee. Do we want to defer a significant amount of our capital to a fall town meeting to allow, a capital committee to take a look at this and maybe have some ideas and things? And then something like this may be ready for that meeting, so would be a number of issues that you could handle. You don't want to have a special town meeting for one issue, for the most part. So just something to consider. So I wanted to just make sure and bring that to your attention. But the warrant is coming together. Have not heard back from National Grid in terms of the parcel 5440. Again, they were doing a check on the parcel to determine the status of the parcel. And I have reached back out to them, and hopefully we'll get some response back from them shortly. So that's really all that I have, unless you have any questions on the article. It's really a pretty straightforward warrant, for the most part. With the exception of some of the zoning issues will take some time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Purple? Just a couple things that I wanted to mention. Obviously, we had a presentation from folks on the Deerfoot Road at our last meeting. Just wanted, if they happen to be watching tonight, and for the board's information, I have not forgotten that, have not ignored that. We did put a request to town council for his recommendation on DPW superintendent's authority with respect to tree removal for sick, diseased trees that are a hazard. We're still awaiting that opinion. I also am trying to schedule a meeting with Ms. Galligan and Conservation Commission agent as well, so I can get more up to speed on exactly what's happened over the last couple of years on that section of the roadway with the development. And once get the information from town council, and once I have that meeting, which hopefully will be soon, I'll be reaching out to the folks on Deerfoot Road. So I've not ignored that, have not forgotten about that, but that is, do not have more information other than that to update the board on at this time. Just also wanted to point out that the memo on the naming of the spaces for the public safety building has been distributed to the board members. So hopefully everybody is reviewing that memo, and was just curious if anybody had I don't need it now if you want to follow up with Mr. Purple on your time, but if you had recommendations for a schedule for moving forward, or a process that we should be following moving forward, if there were questions that that we had of the committee that we would like answered, please consider that, and you can shoot those off to Mr. Purple, and we'll start to act on that. And that's what I had. Other members?
I do. an update on pilot discussions. And I'll try to prevent this from becoming too much of a treatise on Massachusetts law and what's been going on in Massachusetts for the last 40 or 50 years on the payment in lieu of taxes issue. First, just from a very practical standpoint, I've had meetings with both the head of school at St. Mark's and at Fay, and I think as I reported at some earlier meetings, I found those very productive. They very receptive to what I had to say. I was very interested in their viewpoint on pilot payments generally, how they view the role of the nonprofits in the community, and expressed interest in, and I have no reason to think it was anything other than genuine, in being and continuing to be the best neighbors that they possibly can be in the town of Southborough. And that includes ongoing discussions about various payments that in the past have been made by those institutions and might be made going forward. The one thing I'll tell you is that, and from research that I've done, I think it's pretty consistent that there have been cities and towns in the Commonwealth that have in the past attempted to address the issue of payment in lieu of taxes by coming up with a formula. The one that the city of Boston settled on is one that's become very popular, at least in terms of discussion, and that is that nonprofit institutions, and of course that doesn't just include educational institutions, it includes hospitals and religious institutions as well as again anyone who's a nonprofit or charitable organization, that they be responsible for 25% of the property taxes that they otherwise would be liable for if it were private property. I will tell you from my research that most of those efforts have been, if not complete disasters, pretty close to complete disasters. And my view is they're more publicity stunts than they are meaningful efforts. For instance, in the city of Boston, every nonprofit over a certain level received a bill for 25%, and one of the educational institutions in Boston paid the 25%. And there's absolutely nothing the city of Boston can do with respect to those other institutions. So what my research has informed me is that the approach at an initial level that we talked about in this board, which is one of discussion rather than attempting to force something that we really can't force, is likely to be the most productive route. And I will tell you, again, based on my conversations with Fay and St. Mark's, I have no reason to believe that those discussions will not be productive. But they also made very clear to me, and I understand this, they also made very clear to me that their boards of trustees, and I believe they both call them boards of trustees, that they've taken the position in the past, and it's unlikely that they would take a different position going forward, that they've taken the position that they are not interested in any sort of contractual relationship with the town that sets out a particular percentage or amount on an annual basis. It is, I believe, the issue is best approached on an ad hoc basis, an ongoing basis, a continuing basis, but identifying particular expenditures, and that's something that the institutions have been willing to do in the past, particular expenditures that are tied to their mission and that are expenditures that the town makes that are likely to find a much more receptive ear than sending somebody a bill. I plan to have additional discussions with other nonprofits in town, and unless the board tells me otherwise, that's the approach I plan to continue to take with them, and hope that the news continues to be good and that ultimately we can identify some common ground that will provide some additional tax relief for the taxpayers of Southborough, but also underscore the nature of the relationship that the nonprofits have with the town. So that's my mouthful.
Thank you. Ms. Braccio?
Thank you, and thank you for having those discussions and giving us some form of update, and we're all kind of walking a fine line on this. The laws are pretty clear, so thank you for taking that on. I would just like to extend condolences to the family of Donald Banks. He was a reserve police officer here in town, and then he was a water specialist for the DPW for a long period of time, and he's recently passed. So again, I would just like to extend condolences for a former employee of the town to their family. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stivers?
Yeah, a couple of points. One, report that the Master Plan Committee met last week with Senator Eldridge and Representative Dykma with a focus on transportation issues. And very productive and interesting conversation. The point that they were making is that the state and MassDOT is very interested in doing things to address transportation issues statewide, particularly Metro West. They're looking hard at rail through the T and so forth, and other things. And make a long story short, the message that I heard, and Ms. Braccio might want to add some flavor to this one as well, but that there seems to be potential for funding things that sometimes come along in terms of opportunities, money left over, focus on particular program areas for towns that have a short list of interesting projects. Ideally shovel-ready kind of projects, but not necessarily. So we talked about a variety of things like sidewalks, causeway, pedestrian crossings, Route 9 pedestrian bridges, trail network build-out, local bus transport, additional parking at the T station, which is an interesting one. We've talked about doing a lot of things at the T station. Parking is tight there. So it seems to me that it would be helpful for us to figure out how to ask or task some group in town with the responsibility, maybe it's multiple groups, to say, give us a list of projects that might be candidates for funding through opportunistic sources or other sources that our representative and senator can actually know about and be prepared to raise the point should the opportunity arise for them. So I would urge us to, at some point, figure out how we might be able to take advantage of that, position ourselves better to get access to funding for some of these kind of things that could be very important.
Sam, is there a script somewhere that explains what the priority is? In other words, I'm assuming these are public projects.
Yeah, but, well, not so much priority. I mean, for example, Representative Dykma said the T is very supportive of finding ways to increase parking along the commuter rail lines. So one of the things we talked about, crazy idea, building 2 or 3 more stories on the parking lot at the T station. She actually seemed to be pretty interested in that one as a possibility. Now, I don't know how that would fly in town, but those kind of things, to me, is not so much lined up on the T's project list, but if we had something that could be interesting for parking capacity, it sounded like there is a likelihood that they would consider something like that for funding. So, and maybe that's a 5-year project, but if we don't start, it's probably a 100-year project or whatever. So again, I would think the planning board, maybe the EDC, others might have an input to say the Trails Committee has some specific ideas that they're looking for. Pieces like pedestrian crossing the causeway would provide a great link for some trail systems that are now not connected in useful ways. So, my guess is that we could probably come up with, 3, 4, 5 projects that get people thinking about, socialize a little bit, and get the town's reaction, and at least get those on the radar for the people who are watching the money at the state level. So anyway, I think it's worth conversation going forward. Just wanted to get that on people's attention here. One point that I mentioned at the last meeting, the Public Works Planning Board is meeting Monday night to deal with the first pass at a complete streets policy for the town, which this board will eventually have to vote to accept, adopt, or whatever. But that deals with, again, a lot of these same transportation issues, sidewalks, trails, et cetera. How do we build road projects that support the state's complete streets concept, if you will, to provide access for all modes of travel, whether it's pedestrian, vehicular, et cetera. So that's Monday, and I'm hoping that that draft policy gets posted on the website with that agenda for that meeting. And finally, to follow Mr. Shea's earlier point, I've been attending the meetings for the EDC and Planning Board relative to the downtown stuff. And I think you're exactly right, is that there were some process gaps in that activity so far. And again, it seems to me that there's a great opportunity for us to set the pace for that and say, here's what we think downtown ought to be, and here's what we would ask EDC to do, the Planning Board to do, Zoning Board, others, to make that happen, because I think one of the things in my mind that's been missing from that is sort of the top-down vision that says, here's what we're trying to accomplish here. And it may be longer term, very high level, but I think those groups could be more effective and would be much more inclined to say, wow, you know, let's tweak it a little bit, but we think this is a great direction, and now we're ready to row in and make things happen here. I think kudos to the EDC for generating traction and activity there. It's unfortunate that that didn't turn out to provide the forward progress that many of us had hoped for, but I think, again, we have an opportunity, once the budget stuff settles down a little bit here, to maybe reconsider that and say, can we set some direction that allows progress from a variety of groups here? And I'm eager to be part of that process. So that's my report. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving to consent agenda, I'm going to request that we hold item F briefly. Any other items that members would like to hold?
B, please.
Yeah, I've got a hold on item A. I have a small edit to the minutes for the 7th.
So with that, I will make a motion that we approve items C, D, E, and G as listed in the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those pass unanimously. Mr. Stivers, item A.
Right. On the January 7th minutes, there was a minute or note about a comment that I'd made in that meeting about the Master Plan Committee and the Public Works Planning Board Committee, and the dates that were listed there were not what I thought I had said. So I'd sent Mark an edit to straighten that out and change that one paragraph to say that basically that the Master Plan Committee was meeting with our senator and representative on that succeeding Wednesday to talk about transportation issues, and then the Public Works Planning Board meeting was on Monday the 27th, and that didn't come through in the minutes, so I would ask that that be corrected to reflect that. And I'd sent the language to that to Mr.
Yeah,
Purple.
and I agree. I think it's pretty clear. It's pretty easy. So
Yeah,
we
Mark
can-
had shared that with me as well.
Okay.
I think that's
So just for
So-
accuracy's sake there, I would ask that that be made. So other than that, I'm fine with the minutes.
all right. So with that, I'll move that we approve the regular session minutes from January 7th, 2020.
As
with
amended,
the,
yeah.
as amended, with the comment from Mr. Stivers.
Second.
Move second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Ms. Braccio.
I would just like to, more comment, I would just like to extend the board's thanks to Lou Pilecki for the work that they did on the golf course committee, on getting the holes and working with CPC and getting us a wonderful project that we currently have. I think he should be commended for the hard work and the dedication that he's done, and it's a sad day that he's resigning, and I wish we didn't have to accept it, but again, just like to extend our thanks.
I concur, and I hope that he's interested in continuing to serve the town in the future and some other committee as well, but certainly that the whole golf course committee, in particular, Mr. Pilecki, were one of the many influential and instrumental groups to make that whole project the success it was, so.
Yep.
Agreed.
Complete agreement.
So with that, I will move that we accept the resignation of Lou Pilecki from the golf course committee.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously. Item F, Mr. Hegarty.
Thanks for hanging around.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me talk briefly about this. Legislation was passed late in the process to create an early voting period for this presidential primary. So we will have early voting available for any resident for any reason, be held downstairs here from Monday, February 24th, from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. for that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and that Friday until noon. The way the legislation was written, we cannot extend it past noon on Friday when the office closes. So that's just a 1-week period. People can come for, I'm saying this for the benefit of the people at home that might be watching this. If it's easier for people to come vote during that period instead of coming on election day, which we expect will be very busy, they just need to come in. There's no paperwork. It's fast, it's easy, and most people seem to like it. If I could segue for 1 second, I say this to the parents out there that would like to request an absentee ballot for their children in college. All you have to do, if you want us to send one, just call us. We'll be happy to mail you the application. But please, please, please give us the phone number or email address for the child when your child doesn't return it, and there's about a 70% chance they don't. We will reach out to them a week before it's due to say, hey, come on, go dig it out. So sometimes parents are chagrined that they don't vote, but that's maybe just a function, whatever, and raise my hand. It happened when my son was in college, the same deal. I got it a week after the deadline, and I had to pay the return postage because he didn't pay the money. So there you go. All right.
It's a lot easier for the parents to get the ballot than it is to have those kids send it back.
Exactly.
I speak from experience.
Exactly. So if anybody has any questions, just give us a call, and we'll make it easy for everybody. Thank you.
Mr. Purple.
Mr. Chairman, just one piece. Normally, we meet on the 1st and 3rd. We changed the schedule around in February, so we're meeting on the 25th. Since the hours run until 7 p.m., I would suggest we meet at 7 p.m. and not start at 6:30, because people can be quiet as a church mouse, and that sound's going to carry right up here. So I would suggest that you change your meeting start time to 7 p.m. so that they can effectively finish their work.
Okay, sure. Makes sense.
Okay?
Makes sense.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So with that, I'll move the clerk's notice to the Board of Selectmen regarding hours of early voting for the presidential primary.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Other matters properly before the board, review of the proposed Accessibility Compliance Committee bylaw article. Mr. Purple.
Mr. Chairman, so I tried to find an easier way to do this. There is a way, and Ms. Esposito had found it, to be able to take all the comments and put them all into one document. However, it looked an awful lot like a 10-car pileup, and you really couldn't figure out where the arrows were going, what was happening, and so the only other alternative was to wait until tonight to present it to you, because if you remember our open meeting law training, that if this was in the packet, the board had seen this, it would then could be construed as deliberation, because you had everyone's thoughts ahead of time. So what you have in front of you are comments that Mr. Shea, Mr. Healy, Mr. Stivers had submitted for suggested changes. I think some are a little, some go a little more than others, but I do think that you're all kind of hitting on some of the same areas. So maybe, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest you may want to go through this, take it up section by section, and then try to address the comments in those sections, and once we're clear with one of those, we can move forward.
Let's do that. So, Mr. Healy, it looks like the very first change is the change in the name of the committee.
I figured
Recommended.
I'd start at the beginning.
We'll start at the beginning.
And I talked to Mr. Litt about this. I just, the proposed name, which was Accessibility Compliance Committee, it struck me, first of all, created the impression that there was a police function related to the committee that really doesn't exist, but also the entire text of the proposed article is just much more welcoming than that. And I thought that that a title that underscored that made more sense than highlighting a compliance function that really isn't the main part of their function. So,
And I'm fine with that, too. I think that's a more positive
Yep.
start with it, so.
I like that. We'll incorporate that.
Yes.
Mr. Stivers, I'll go to you next.
Then-
So,
Yeah, basically, much of what I proposed was what I describe as wordsmithing through here. Just to, I think, tighten it up and to, in my view at least, make it read better. So, and I think my comment in the first paragraph about particularly for those having a disability seemed to me, I'm looking at Mr. Healy's copy. Marty, did you make a change in the first paragraph?
You know, so, well, I'll just chime in here as well. And I didn't make it in the first paragraph, but I did later on. I just recommended removing altogether whether or not having a disability, and ending the sentences with access to facilities, programs, and services for all members of the public, period. I mean, all members of the public are all members of the public.
Yep.
So I don't know that those other words specifically added anything, so.
Yeah, yeah,
I think that makes sense.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Throughout here, yeah.
Kind of took a when in doubt, take it out
Yep.
approach. Period. Did anybody have comments, edits to the listing of the acts? or
No,
laws?
I
All right.
didn't, yeah.
So the next paragraph, I guess I'll go to Mr. Healy on that. Looks like you had the most extensive wordsmithing on that.
Yeah, mine didn't come out.
Yeah, it's not a red line, so I can't see
Yeah,
what the changes were, which is
I'm trying to.
frustrating.
I'm not quite sure. I thought I did, but I guess it didn't. In the. Yeah, no, I've got it. It's just
Oh,
it's
you've got
not.
it? Sorry.
Yeah, I've got my it's
I
weird.
thought it was a color issue.
No, no.
Okay.
When I mine is red line, but
Yeah.
but it you know it goes from one word program to another, and it doesn't necessarily translate. So yeah, I'm having the same trouble reading my own edits. Again, it's not, for the most part, my changes to that paragraph have nothing to do with the substance of the paragraph. They simply have to do with what I think is stating it a little more succinctly and more clearly.
I agree.
Yeah, and mine don't either. I, had a defined term in here with the town, which I'd use subsequently.
Yeah.
Let me
So
read
I like
this
the
here.
first sentence the way you had it written, Marty, so. I'd recommend that we move forward with that first sentence in lieu of the previous first sentence.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Membership qualifications. So it seemed like a couple
So
people, well,
are
we all
we
had,
adopting this?
we're adopting that,
Fine.
The
yes.
first paragraph, that
Yep.
paragraph. And I think it makes sense, Sam, I think just putting in the town there also,
Yeah, as
yeah,
a
right
defined
after the
term.
first time we say Southborough.
Yep.
So,
Okay, so one of the questions that I had was the coordinator. And I guess it kind of ties into the discussion that we had here. If we're going to identify an existing position in town that's also then going to take on the role of coordinator for this committee, it is going to introduce discussion of stipends or increased salary to account for additional tasks that position may be doing that is not currently in that person's job description. So I guess I'm just asking the general question, does this committee need a coordinator? Can the committee function without a coordinator? is it an important function to have the coordinator?
I guess I think it is conceptually, in the sense that I think, as we've seen in a number of areas, you have to have a head on the dog here. Somebody needs to be, pushing. Volunteer committees are great and often do wonderful work, but it's tough to look to a volunteer committee to have the range I think this group
Well,
is expected
I
to
know
have.
we don't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we have a coordinator for like the cable committee, right? They take the lead, they take the charge on that. I mean, there are a number of other committees that are comprised, I mean, our Public Safety Building Committee. I think, Mark was a member of it, but he wasn't necessarily identified as a coordinator
Right.
for that committee,
Right.
so.
And I agree with Marty's comments in here as well, that, sorry, Terry, thank you. I agree with Selectman Healy's comments here that, should a committee really be directing a town employee? I think that's a very valid point as well. I guess I'm unclear exactly on what they're looking for the coordinator to do. Just responsible for accepting and recording concerns, coordinating reviews and other duties that may be assigned. That could entail, without knowing, that could become a full-time coordinator, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think there's enough definition there.
Well, Mark, if we were gonna follow this approach and appoint a public accessibility coordinator to work with the committee, for instance, who might that be? Would that be almost by default you, or?
Well, it's kind of been default, the town administrator position, but I'm willing to talk stipend, so. No, it's,
Dollar a year.
it's, yeah.
Right
yeah.
number.
I'll take 50 cents, we'll go from there, but, it has been by default the town administrator position. In most communities, that's kind of where it defaults to. I do know that, for the meetings, for the most part, based on availability, you've got myself, you've got the building commissioner, and the facilities director.
Facilities, yeah.
They come to the meeting. Now, you can't have the building commissioner be the, be this person simply because they're the enforcing authority, and you can't have that person be a coordinator.
Right.
It's a conflict. I have no problem continuing to do it. It's not a lot of heavy lifting, and it's fine. I think it just needs to be articulated then that, I don't report. I think it's a reporting structure issue.
Yep.
If it's the town administrator. If it's not, then I think it's less of an issue. But the question, if not me, then who?
Mark, how often do they meet?
They meet roughly once a month.
Which isn't to say that they're gonna continue to only meet
Right.
once a month.
Right.
And we have no idea what,
So in the capital plan, there is a Title II self-evaluation, which each city and town is required to do, which essentially takes a look at all of your buildings, your programs and everything, determines where your accessibility issues are, and then you use that to help define what capital improvements and things you need to make and help to, become fully compliant on these things. So that's gonna take some time and effort. The committee's gonna need some assistance with that. Again, if it's me, I'm gonna end up probably delegating some of those things, to other people.
But Mark, I think that's a key function in terms of someone to organize and follow up on things that in theory the committee could do, but as I've observed over the past, that sometimes fall between the cracks. So I think if we want, real traction here, which
Right.
I think we do,
Right.
somebody to sort of be the glue that
And
holds
the
it
question
together.
is, and I think it makes sense with it being me, but the plate's only so big, and sometimes there's a lot of
Right.
potential for something to slip. So, that's something else. And look, and I'll be honest with you too, if it's another position, sometimes there may be the discussion, it's an additional duty and responsibility. Is there some level of compensation, for consideration on that?
Mhm.
I'm not saying it's a must, I'm just saying that would not be, a discussion that would be a surprise.
Yep.
So,
Well, so if we kept the coordinator function here somehow, and you were to do that, the concern you have then is who reports to who?
I just think it's a, a lot of people want to have control over the
Right.
town administrator position, some level of authority in providing direction, and I think, the board should be, more protective of me.
So we may be changing some of the language to say, as may be requested by the committee or something like that versus directed by.
Well, I took that out.
I like the
Yeah.
way that Marty wrote it. The Board of Selectmen shall designate public accessibility coordinator in consultation with SPAC. So,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm still having trouble, Marty, without the red line here, so.
Yeah, and then it just says the coordinator shall be responsible. It takes out the coordinator,
Marty sticks his notes in the middle.
Under the direction of the ACC.
Yeah, yeah.
It takes that out.
yeah.
Now, Brian, you'd raised a question about the town, not a town employee, or somebody had raised that
I
question.
did.
Yeah. I mean, I think the issue for me there is that town employees are the ones that sometimes may be, involved in the execution end, if you will, or if there are gaps or shortcomings, it's, I think, awkward if the committee is pressing on a town employee saying somehow, what your area of responsibility is somehow deficient that needs to be brought up to speed, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it gives you a level of objectivity if you've got folks who are not directly involved in the operation that's being reviewed here. So I think that was at least my understanding of the genesis of that kind of language. And I'd put in some of the definitions here, town employee and, dealing with municipal employees and special municipal employees in terms of other committee members to clarify some of that. And Marty, you did.
Yeah, I see that. I'm fine with the definitions, but it would seem to, because you're focusing on the salary administration plan, I mean, presumably police and fire are municipal employees.
Correct.
they're not in the.
But not an SAP, so that was a gap in my logic
Okay,
there.
all right.
So I think dealing with that more specifically will.
Yeah, no,
avoid-
I'm
will
just saying
avoid-
that I'm assuming that
Yeah.
you intended
I
to include them.
intended to include
Yeah,
them,
okay.
that's correct, yes. And I also added some language about quorums in here that often comes up nowadays. So to point out that ex officio non-voting shall not count toward the calculation of a quorum, just to avoid any misunderstanding.
I'm fine with that.
At that point in the first
Yeah.
paragraph where you'd said, and non-voting
Yep.
identified.
Are you following all this, Mark? No.
No, Katie is.
For the yeah,
Got it, that's right.
Incorporating,
Got a red line, a
So,
blue line, and a purple line.
incorporating Sam's second paragraph.
Some of first paragraph about the ex officio non-voting.
Yep.
And then
Marty's
some of
is
the
the basis.
definitions in the
Yes.
second.
but adding that.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
All right, B and C.
I'd made a couple of changes in C.
Seems fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
How about my changes in C? Again, clarify who's voting and when this happens. And what the vote is.
That's fine.
Good
These are
with that.
practical issues that have generated questions in the past that I think are worth clarifying.
That's fine.
That makes sense.
Was there anything in B?
And again, I think it's useful to clarify that this goes through the normal budget process and when
That, okay,
when the
yeah.
expenses get submitted, et cetera, annually. Again, to be clear in terms of what we're expecting.
I'm okay with D.
I'm fine.
With the changes I proposed there?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
Again, under 9.3.5, I had just recommended ending that sentence
Yep.
on the third line after the word public, and deleting whether or not having a disability.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm trying to
Okay.
Marty's changes here versus my changes.
I took out a lot of
Took out
a lot of the words
The
and
introductory
just
paragraph.
just did bullets for powers and duties.
So one of the questions I had was, is it the bulleted items, is this something that's better left to a policy of the committee once it's formed as opposed to listing them in this bylaw?
Yeah, but I think we ought to be, at least, certainly hit the major issues, I guess.
And I will tell you where, now I'm remembering, I got these from, I think it was the town of Concord that had a pretty
Mhm.
robust
Right.
public accessibility committee or something like that.
Right.
That's why I'm looking, I'm going, why do I have more? And now I remember that I looked at a couple of different towns, and one of them was Concord had a very robust
Mhm.
listing. I mean, if the concern is that it's limiting by doing bullets, we could do, I guess, a last bullet that says, and, well, no.
And that's why I put the before the list, include but not limited to the following. If we eliminate the lead-in, then we don't have that. And maybe you put at the end of the thing, and other related duties as may be assigned by the Board of Selectmen or something like that. To leave yourself flexibility so you don't have to go back and change the bylaw if something else comes up.
I guess my general, I'm fine with anything like that, but my general reaction is that the paragraph, that the only thing important in 9.35 is the list.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the other stuff is just verbiage.
Yep,
I agree.
okay, I'll buy that. I guess one point that I would add, Marty, though, is in the first point. I'm a big fan of the word applicable up there. Compliance with all applicable laws, statutes, policies, blah, blah, blah. Because there are laws related to things that we don't do that don't apply here, so I think that gives us the flexibility, and it's not perfectly precise. On the other hand, I think that,
That'd be in the first bullet then.
Yep,
yeah.
yeah, just
Okay.
change that to applicable.
And
Yep.
then maybe if you want, I can just, maybe, Mark, I can shoot, if folks are fine with that, I can just draft up a final bullet that is sort of captures what Sam and Brian were both getting at, that it doesn't mean to be restrictive.
Yep.
That,
Yep.
whether it's by Board of Selectmen, but let me think about that language, if that's all right?
Do we want to include some of the stuff that was originally in the following paragraph below the list? I mean, I like the concept of, from time to time, no less frequently than annually, committee shall report to the board and a town meeting.
Well,
I thought we had that.
you did, to periodically, but not less than once per calendar year.
Okay,
That's in,
all right, in the list, all right.
yep, in
Good. I
Marty's.
missed that.
Yep.
So if it's fine, just adding that additional bullet, I think we're done.
I'm fine.
All right, so I would suggest that we put together one more compiled
Yep.
Okay?
version with all
Yes.
these comments, and include that on our agenda for our next meeting, unless it's February 4th, and then we'll do it on February 11th.
Okay,
Our first non-budget meeting, and we can have one more read-through to make sure everybody's in agreement with the way it was compiled, and we can be one step closer to getting it into Aldo's hands for his review for inclusion in the warrant.
Because I'd also like to provide it to the ADA committee.
Sure.
So they can see,
Yep.
you know, they liked what was submitted. They understand that it may not end up in that fashion. I think there's a level of trust that they have. So the sooner that we can get this all set, the better.
And maybe, Brian, if Marty can get his comments in, or summary into Mark, and Mark can distribute it, and we can send our comments back to Mark in advance of that meeting, so you got a sense of, you know, what items might be up for discussion next time.
Yeah, it shouldn't be very much.
Would be
No,
helpful,
not
yep.
at all.
Yep.
Okay.
That work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. With that, the board will be entering into executive session per MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21, Exemption 2, for negotiations with the police chief on a successor employment agreement. The board will not be returning to open session at the conclusion of executive session. Shay, aye.
Did you, Healy, aye.
Russia, away.
Stivers, aye.
We are in executive session. Thank you, everybody.